This is the scariest American horror film I've seen. It said no one dared leave alone after seeing it because the bald monster spinning 360 degrees is terrifying. Friendship tips: high energy stimulation is recommended. Watch the Aitken film DayZ It together, but I can't guarantee you'll have the guts for the most horrifying film ever. All Saints Day. But it was because of this flirtatious maneuver that a group of chickens went on a deadly expedition to the famous chest house and castle in town. As soon as they entered the castle, the four of them got separated due to haunting. Apparently they didn't believe in the rumor that the place was haunted. However, as Jean and John find the hidden basement room, the door to hell is inadvertently opened by the two men, and the first to suffer is Chuck, who hides in a closet from Augie's attack, but soon turns from excitement to horror when the door slides open a crack and there is no longer a scene of disrepair and disfigurement. Chuck slowly shifts his gaze in amazement and is horrified to find that in the room there is also an old woman, and that he seems to have discovered himself. And Chuck was so frightened that he immediately closed the door, hoping to escape, but the sound of footsteps outside the door came nearer and nearer and nearer, and by this time he had lost 7 of his 3 souls, and in the next moment he knew, even as he was in his right mind, that he had lost all of his 3 souls. But when he called out to Jean to get out of the place, Jean made a new discovery. Inside the closed basement room, he found the legendary story of Shara, the evil ghost, which was said to have been written in the blood of children, and to have caused the deaths of all who heard it. Chuck was so shocked by what he'd just seen that he strongly advised Uncle John to put it back in its place and get out of the place. But by this time it was too late for them to leave, for the only exit from the basement room had been sealed off by Tommy, the deadliest of the huddled masses, but his girlfriend, Lucy, was after all Chuck's own sister, and after much begging and pleading, Tommy finally compromised with Lucy and let her open the door, but the fellow, who had been so bad that he kicked Lucy down behind his back, was not to be trusted, so it was evident that there was nothing Tommy would not have done, except for human affairs, and that it was precisely the same sort of sordid behavior which had been the source of so many of the complaints which were made against him. At the cost of his blood, the people were discussing how to get out of the house and get Jean to open the ancient book. As he spoke, a black smoke slowly rose from the rocking chair, and then spread rapidly outwards, opening the door of the basement in a flash, and enabling the men to escape. But no one noticed that Jean did not put the book back in its place, but slipped it into his bag before coming out. He was a lover of horror stories, and when he got home, he opened the book as soon as he could read. He reached the last story, Harold, but what was so strange to watching was that the handwriting looked as if it had just been written, but after reading it, he was even more puzzled and puzzled. Meanwhile, when Tommy got home late at night, drunk, his mother blamed him for forgetting the eggs for the neighbors due to drinking. Tommy had to go to the henhouse, collect the eggs, and wobble to the neighbors. It was usual to pass Harold the Scarecrow with a curse and a kick, but today, he picked the wrong scarecrow. Once again, the figure of Harold was around the corner in Umity. Harold, who seemed slow, was indeed as slow as an ox, and continued in this manner, never managing to catch up with Tommy. However, Tommy, holding the weapon confidently in his hands, ran with wild assurance, claiming he wished to reclaim his manly dignity. Yet, he couldn't foresee that the weapon would be snatched from him in under 3 seconds, and then Harold would stab him through the chest. One day, Sadan visited the school and shared with his 2 closest friends the peculiar events described in the book. According to the book, Tommy's ultimate fate was to become a scarecrow. Initially, the pair were greatly astonished by this tale, but as Tommy vanished without a trace, Jean grew increasingly uneasy. He felt compelled to discover if the book's story truly related to Tommy. Thus, he and Kung ventured to the Tamarin to determine if Harold remained the same Harold, albeit now dressed in Tommy's clothes. Although they couldn't find Tommy, this wasn't sufficient to allay Jean's doubts. To end this, Jean went alone to the haunted castle and returned the ancient book to its shelf. But what happened next was even more shocking. He put the book back, yet bizarrely appeared in his bedroom and opened it. What happened was incredible. He appeared out of thin air, and the book wrote its own horrors. No matter how much Jean tried, he couldn't escape. The story's hero was her friend, Augie, whom Jean contacted at the first chance. However, when Jean informed her that Augie was consuming the toes of others, she initially thought it was a prank on her. Yet, the book detailed how Augie would indeed eat the toes of others, leading to dreadful voices echoing in her ears, accompanied by a phrase about ghastly corpses in search of their missing toes. It seemed Augie didn't take these warnings to heart and continued feasting on the toes of others, which were tender and plump. But shortly after, he realized the food in his mouth was too tough for his teeth to handle, prompting him to spit it out. He then glanced at the pot. The food was so revolting that he felt a surge of disgust, and to make matters worse, there were genuinely terrifying noises in his ears. Augie attempted to flee, only to discover he was trapped within the room. Before the creature could locate him, Augie managed to lock himself inside the door. The door to the bedroom opened very slowly, with Maeva carefully turning the lock. Augie was desperately praying that he wouldn't be discovered. He tried to imagine that no monster was there, but his attempts were futile. When Jean and Kun finally arrived, Augie was nowhere to be found in the room. The only evidence left behind were the desperate scratches underneath the bed, which were still visible. Jean fell into a profound state of self-loathing because of them. If he hadn't brought the book out of the house. The book was too much to handle and too heavy to discard. To fix it, they returned to its origins. They needed to discover what happened to Shara, the evil ghost. They examined all the files on Shara and the Best family and learned that after Shara's death, the Best family dismissed Haven's son and daughter, Lulu. Records showed that within a year, the Best family vanished without a trace, becoming part of a horrific story in the Book of Horrors. Then, Auto Economy appeared again, this time as a story called Red Dot. They saw tomato sauce on Chuck and feared he'd be next, terrifying him. But when the book mentioned the girl bitten by spiders, they realized it was only Chuck's sister, Lucy, bitten accidentally. So, they allied to visit Lucy, where she was hosting an event. He noticed something unusual on his face and hurried to the bathroom to find out what was amiss. However, he was not prepared for a large leg to emerge from his face. He attempted to remove it, but received a startling surprise. Meanwhile, the three of them quickly rushed over to deal with the spider and get rid of it. But even so, Lucy was still scared out of her wits, ever since the accident. Chuck is awakened every day by a nightmare in which he is trapped in the Red Room, pursued by a fat, dead white woman. But as the story is not written in the ancient books at this time, which means there is still time for the three of them to save themselves, they seek out Ruru, the quack of the Besses, to find out what is going on, only to be surprised by the truth that Salad did not die at home, as had been rumored, but hanged herself in a hospital during her treatment. Upon inquiry, they learned that the information was kept in the Red Room and that an appointment was needed. But they were pressed for time, so they took advantage of the sparseness of the doctors to sneak into the hospital to look for the Red Room. But when they reached the door, Chuck refused to go in, not realizing that it was precisely this act of harassment that drove them to a road of no return. After they left, Chuck tried to leave the hospital, but he got lost in the road, and was finally chased by 3 security guards. On the other hand, Ching and Ching found the information they were looking for in a recording of Sarah's illness. It was then that the truth came out that Sarah was not sick at the time, that her family ran a paper mill in the town, and that the mill discharged large quantities of mercury-laden wastewater every day, poisoning countless children in the town, and that the family sacrificed Sarah for the sake of their profits, creating a ghostly spectacle, and that they kept Sarah locked in the basement for long periods of time so that their lies wouldn't be blown out of proportion. But there was a reason for this. Once upon a time, there was a paper mill, and it was eventually exposed. Sarah's brother, who worked as a doctor at the local hospital, began to torment Sarah daily. Under the guise of providing treatment, he used electric shocks on her. His intention was to make her lethargic and useless to the family, and to taint the children's black pots. This relentless torture became unbearable for Sarah, and in the end, she took her own life by hanging herself. At that precise moment, the voice emanating from the tape recorder abruptly shifted into the dream Chuck had described. Meanwhile, Jean's Alliance retrieved an ancient book, which contained a story written by Sarah herself. Concurrently, the 3 guards were unable to locate Chuck, concerned about his safety. They sounded the alarm, and in a flash, the entire corridor underwent a transformation. Red Chuck ran to find his mom, but a ghost was always ahead. As the gap between the 2 parties narrowed, Chuck was soon caught up in a flurry of blows. In the next moment, the large white creature enveloped Chuck, and within a few breaths, he was completely absorbed. When Ching and the others reached the police station, Chuck had vanished, with only a pen on the ground as evidence of his presence. That night, they were brought to the police station, and the disappearance of a student caught the chief constable's attention. However, he doubted a book could cause such events, so he offered them a night's stay at the station. Yet, what occurred that night changed his long-held beliefs. He witnessed a ghost story appear on a blank page of an ancient book, making him more convinced by the bizarre occurrences before him. But as the lights dimmed at the police station, a talking head tumbled down the chimney. The sheriff drew his pistol and fired multiple shots, but the attack had little impact. Then, the monster's body parts swirled down the chimney and reassembled swiftly. The sheriff was frozen in shock as the monster ruthlessly twisted his neck off, tossing his body aside. The monster aimed for Kung, but the holding room's railing hindered its access. At that crucial moment, Sadie managed to grab the key and rescue Kung from the station. Just in time, Jean seized the key and freed Kung before the monster could enter. After leaving the station, they split into two groups. Jean went to the old house to reveal the truth about the child's disappearance to Sarah, potentially easing grievances and offering a chance for life, while Kung sped away in a car. Had he slowed down, he might have foreseen his fate. Yet, he couldn't predict the monster's speed, allowing it to continue relentlessly. Kung decided to give the monster a dose of Munchkin. He fastened his seatbelt and headed straight to the big train parked at the side of the road. The monster could not break free for a while. Kung ran to the old house to join Jean. On the other hand, Jean had just entered the old house and the scene before his eyes changed. He had entered the time and space of decades ago, and now, in the mirror, his appearance changed to that of Stella. He was experiencing what Stella had experienced, and all the people in the old house were searching for him, trying to put him into the dark place again. Sadie was finally thrown roughly into the dark underground room, where it was pitch black, but even more frightening than the darkness was the approaching Sarah. On the other hand, Kung, who had been forced by the monster into a corner of the house, felt Sadie's fear and encouraged him to tell Sarah the truth. Sadie thought of what had happened to her and her companions, and she overcame her fear by confronting Sarah and telling her that it hadn't been her fault and that you had been a victim, not a monster. But what does it matter if you target an innocent or your own? This time, Salad let go of her obsession and gave Jean the pen to write her next story. When Sarah fell, she finally released her obsession and resentment, finding freedom. The hairless monster of the Red Rock vanished, and the film concluded with Jean fulfilling her promise to include the truth of Sarah's encounter in her upcoming storybook. It might not be believed, and it might be questioned, but the truth shouldn't be lost to misinformed opinions. I am Yasser Arafat. Please tell me what you think of my video in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe the channel to see the next interesting horror video.